Hello, good afternoon, Liv. It's a pleasure to have you back again.
Hello, thank you.
Hello.
It's nice to see you too.
Indeed, it's always a pleasure to see each other. Now, I have to say, today's topic is one which I find fascinating, and it's one which is, I imagine, going to be rather emotive to many people, especially in Scandinavia. And that is, basically, we're talking about some news articles that have been doing the rounds, talking about the possibility that in Norse or Viking armies there was up to 50% of the soldiers were women. And this is a percentage which not only seems to be a little bit questionable in terms of the application of this in this particular instance, this claim, but also as well one which has slightly bothered you, and I thought it'd be worthwhile having a bit of a chat about it. So do you want to just sort of explain to the boys and girls at home what this claim is, first of all?
Well, it was a news article that was based on a scientific paper that was posted a few years ago. The paper in itself says that they have found Viking burials with women in them, and they have found typical warrior gear among a few of these women graves. And in the article they claim that maybe a third of the women or the people coming over to England and Wales during the Viking age were females. And this new article has, or blog post rather, have put it out to be 50% women were warriors.
Right. Okay. So the initial research was more about the people who were migrating and diaspora, yeah. Right. Whereas this blog post and subsequent sort of claims in other areas seems to be taking that figure, expanding it, and applying it to warriors. Now, why is this a problem? I mean, I think I know the answer, but weren't women sometimes allowed on the battlefield? I mean, isn't that true?
Yeah, of course they probably were. I mean, we find the same gear in some of the female graves that we find in male graves that are typically labeled as warriors. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But the problem with this blog post is, for one thing, it's obviously reinterpreting the article in itself rather crudely, which makes the claim in itself lose value, and it has gained opposition from rather political sides that takes this crude interpretation and makes it in like, oh, they're lying. Women can't be warriors. Is the one extreme, and one extreme goes, of course they can be, of course 50% were women. So it doesn't take the archaeology into concern, really. And if we look at the Viking research area overall, we have a long line of researching female positions and in society, in Viking society, which shows that women had a strong position in society, and you don't need to spice up the facts.
Well, absolutely, and that's a very good point. I mean, you know me long enough to know that I have a particular passion and interest in this period.
Yeah.
And in particular, if half of all warriors coming from Scandinavia were women, Christian Europe, Charlemagne, the Saxons, other people would have commented this would have been something of an affront. It would have been worth writing down, and they never did write it down. But that's not to say that the women can't be warriors. We've already just sort of touched on that, but also the fact that actually the women, as you say, had power. I mean, one of my favourite facts of all time is it the Oseberg ship. Was made for a woman. The grandest, finest Viking burial that we've ever found was a woman's.
It's a beautiful ship.
It's a gorgeous ship. Have you had a chance to go and see it at all?
No, I haven't. I've been near it. I've driven past it when I've been in Norway, but I haven't ever had the chance to go and see it.
Oh man, how could you drive past it?
Well, I had a family who wasn't interested.
Oh well, yes. Forget the family. I'd dive out of the car, do a roll, and go. But So, what do you think is the motivation behind this claim then? This, and also actually the counterclaims. Why do you think people get so, I suppose, desperate to either say yes, women were warriors and the Vikings were progressive in that sense specifically, or people go, no, women can't be warriors because they're weak and feeble.
It's always, in my view, that these kind of claims come up in a about the current politics rather than an actually interest in the past. You try to use the past to point out issues in today's society or to argue and discuss about them in a different way. And if you can talk about 50% of the women Viking warriors being warriors, then you can say, well, this proves that today's society may have flaws, or in the other directions, no, females have never been able to be warriors, so they can't be warriors now. And that whole feminist argument that's going on, especially online today.
So do you think in some ways this is a case of people, as so often has happened, using the past as a political playground? It's that element of...
Absolutely. And I mean, you always come into that when you do historical and social sciences in any kind of field. If you talk about the past, you always interpret it with your own present eyes. So you can't get away from being interested in what is going on today and putting that into the past. But that's why one has to go on what you find in the archaeological record and not just go on a feeling on what should be right or would be right or what seems natural, because what seems natural often is a very cultural preference.
Absolutely. I suppose in that sense it's a little bit like the failed attempts of, say, Marxist archaeologists and other people with a political agenda to map their current drives and agendas onto the past. It just doesn't quite fit. Now, it's worthwhile just saying, and I think it's worthwhile just as briefly going over the fact that actually, certainly, Viking society was different from modern Western society. That goes almost without saying. So I suppose, is there anything that you think a modern person might find surprising about the role of women in Norse society?
Well, especially if one doesn't know much about Viking society, the whole economical power of the woman could seem surprising for such an old culture. I mean, females in Viking society owned the household. The economical and property was owned by the woman, and woman never left her family. The man joined her family and she had the right to divorce him for numerous of reasons. And if those reasons were found valid by the witnesses that she called for the divorce, then he was basically left with nothing. If a woman divorced a man for no reason, he got the household. But she needed like 2 witnesses to prove her case. So
So that might be, using today's language, might be seen as a very progressive society. But actually, I suppose what we're looking at is a society where it's not that people have equal roles, but rather they have roles which are assigned in a slightly different way to what they are today.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that we're talking about so-called free women, rather wealthy women. I mean, we still have like a slave caste in white society where neither men nor women had many rights.
No, exactly. You couldn't pay me to be a thrall, although that would be ironic.
No, we couldn't.
No. Well, yeah, you wouldn't.
I could pay someone else.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. But okay. So actually, in that sense, what do you think is the most healthy way to, not just I suppose with the Vikings, but just in general, to think about gender roles in the past, but also I suppose anthropologically in other societies? For example, is there such thing as an equal society? I'm not sure I know what that would look like, to be honest.
I mean, equality is always it's a big word to use. I mean, what is equality? Is it that everyone one may do what they're happy to do, or is it that the equal number of people do the equal number of things? I mean, you can always ponder that question. I mean, yeah, but to look at other cultures or historical cultures with gender eyes is to remember that they are different, and that one has one's own prefixes or set values on what is normal and what is right, and that they might differ from culture to culture. So something that may seem ludicrous to us may be completely natural for someone else. And to look at the core hard facts that you can find, rather than to try to interpret loose facts, or what you want to be facts anyway. So we have the fact that we find swords and shields and warrior gear in female graves, and we have found that in male graves, and there seems to be more of that in male graves than in female graves. But I mean, if one will be very willingly, one can interpret that maybe like women didn't want to be warriors, but they could, or women weren't allowed to be warriors, but there were exceptions, or only some women could. I mean, you can interpret those facts in so many ways that you have to be careful in what conclusions you draw and how far you draw them.
Okay. I mean, perhaps the answer is, and this is a stunning, shocking thing to think, I know, but perhaps the answer is that maybe in every society gender roles aren't absolute. I know, it's stunning. It's
you can't say things like that.
No, you can't. But I mean, well, for example, I'm reminded of studies which show that there are societies which are, say, hunting and gathering based, and the men will go out doing hunting, and they'll come back and go, look at the deer, I killed it just by looking at it, look at it, it's dead, the meat is here, I'm a man. But they actually, even though they feel very manly, they're not actually being as successful, both in terms of relationships and frankly in terms of, say, reproduction, as the men who are seen as a little bit less manly, and who spend the time gathering and bonding and forming emotional relationships and frankly meeting up discreetly with women in the forest.
You mean that having a relationship with a woman makes it easier to reproduce?
It's crazy, I know. So actually, yeah, in that sense, having these sort of blurred gender roles actually is advantageous to society, and maybe people in the past, just like people today, could in some instances make choices about how they behaved, and in other instances maybe the norms were very different to what we think of often as being normal. I mean, it's I don't know, I continue to find it amazing that people are looking for this perfect society in the past that had this balance which they want to express to the world. I suppose finally, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? What would you like to see more generally in terms of the understanding about history and gender roles?
Basically what you said, and also that I would want a larger understanding on how difficult it is for an archaeologist or an historian to make those interpretations. Because most people that I meet anyway that are not archaeologists or historians go, oh, but isn't that kind of obvious? And you're like, no, no, it's not. I mean, we have old cases from like the 18th and 19th century when people find a Stone Age or even earlier grave like Viking, and they just look at oh, there's swords and spears and arrowheads, so it has to be a man. And then when we do an astrologist
bone archaeology, yes.
Yeah, bone archaeology analyst of it, it's like, no, it was a woman, she had 5 or 6 kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, and again, and this might be, I suppose my ending point in that sense would be that interpretive bias, that sort of arrow man, arrow hunter, frankly, arrow phallus, that kind of idea, is one which They never seem to misinterpret when it's applied to children. For example, if a boy or a girl is with an arrow, it's not really seen as manly. It's seen as a potential status of hunting power in the future.
Yeah.
They don't sort of go man. They go, oh, and look at that. Look, and he's been given this special status, even though he or she didn't make it into adulthood. So maybe there's like an implied gender bias, and dare I say, possibly in some cases, I mean, it's too strong a word, but sexism when it comes to that. And people need to sort of try and archaeologists need to try and divorce themselves from some of those assumptions themselves. But
yeah, and I think there's a good, at least in Sweden, there's a good discussion within the field about that. I don't know how it is in the UK, but
no, we've been trying to tackle it for a while now, and but then again, I mean, and thankfully in this case, as far as we can tell, this blog that's actually, you know, started us off on this rant or this conversation wasn't necessarily written by an archaeologist. It was written by
wasn't.
Yeah,
lucky.
Yeah, and they were misinterpreting it as study, but I just thought it was worthwhile having a chat about it, really. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you soon.
Same to you.
Bye bye.